Welcome to the sleep paralysis tapes. Settle into the dark, pull the covers close, and let the heavy silence fill your room. Tonight, we descend into chilling tales of the unexplained. Before the screen fades to pitch black, I invite you to become part of this archive. If you have your own terrifying encounters, please contact me and I will narrate your story in a future tape. If these shadows bring you comfort, please like, subscribe, and tap the bell. Now, close your eyes. Do not look at the foot of your bed. Just listen and let us begin. Mark Ellison loved the silence. That's the first thing you need to understand about him. He was a 49-year-old IT manager from Phoenix. He spent his days in a sea of server hum and frantic phone calls. His escape was a 4-acre plot of land off State Route 83 near Sonoita, Arizona. It was a dark sky community. On a good night, the only light came from the stars. He arrived on the evening of October 12th, 2022. The air was cold and clear. It was the kind of night that makes the sky look like a black bowl dusted with salt. It was perfect. His routine was a ritual. He'd park his truck and unload the heavy cases. He set up the mount first. It was a sturdy German equatorial type. Then came the telescope itself. It was an 8-inch Ritchie Chrétien reflector. It looked less like a pirate's spyglass and more like a sleek black cannon. He attached the guide scope and the camera. That was a specialized astronomy camera called a ZWO-AS I2600mm Pro. It was a complicated, expensive puzzle, and he loved putting it together. This was his piece. The methodical clicks and locks, the soft whir of the mount finding its home. He spent nearly an hour on polar alignment alone. He tweaked the knobs until the North Star sat exactly where it should. He wasn't just pointing at the sky. He was locking his entire rig to the spin of the Earth. Precision was everything. Tonight's target was an old friend, the Orion Nebula. It's a cloud of gas and dust where new stars are born. To the naked eye, it's a fuzzy smudge in Orion's sword. To Mark's equipment, it could be a cathedral of light. He finished his focus routine. He used a bright star to get it razor sharp. The computer showed a field of pinpoint stars. He entered the coordinates. The mount slewed with a smooth electric purr. And there it was. M42. Even on the preview, you could see the faint, wispy glow. He started the sequence. It was a 5-minute exposure. The guide camera would make tiny corrections. It kept a single star perfectly still so the main image would be pristine. He hit go. Then, he did what all astrophotographers do. He waited. He made a cup of coffee on his portable burner. He checked the weather app. He looked up with his own eyes. He marveled at the Milky Way smeared across the sky. It was a perfect, quiet, desert night. Nothing was wrong. The sub-exposure finished. The camera downloaded the data. A grayscale image began to render on his laptop screen, line by line. This is where the story should have ended. A beautiful image. A quiet success. He should have packed up by midnight. He should have driven home tired and happy. The image finished loading. It was stunning. The nebula's delicate folds were there. So were the subtle gradients of light. It was a work of art captured from 1,000 light-years away. But cutting right through the center of the frame was a thin, brilliant streak. It went from one edge to the other. Mark sighed. A satellite. It happens. The sky is full of them. Sometimes you get unlucky. One ruins a long exposure. You throw that frame out. You take another. He leaned in and zoomed on the streak. It was perfectly straight, a clean line. At one end of the line was a point of light. It was brighter than anything else in the image. That was the satellite itself. The streak was its path. It was burned into the sensor over the 5 minutes as it moved. He was about to dismiss it. but something made him pause. He pulled up a satellite tracker app on his phone. He checked the timestamp of the image. He checked the exact patch of sky. He cross-referenced it with known satellite orbits, the bright ones, the ISS, the big communication clusters. Nothing should have been there. The streak was moving fast, sure, but its trajectory was off. It didn't match the smooth arc of a low Earth orbit satellite. This was different. A meteor, then? No. Meteors are usually thicker. They're often green or orange. They don't have a bright, distinct point at the head. They're streaks of ablation. This was a point and a line. He stared at the bright point at the head of the streak. In astrophotography, stars are pinpoints. Planets are tiny disks. This was just a dot. A uniform, unwavering dot of white light. He told himself it was space debris, something too small to be tracked. It had to be. So he did what any dedicated imager would do. He calibrated a new sub-exposure to subtract the noise from the next frame. He reset the sequence. He aimed again at the beautiful, swirling nebula. He took another 5-minute exposure. I wish I could tell you the second image was clean. I wish I could tell you the first was just a glitch, a trick of the light, a stray cosmic ray hitting the sensor. But it wasn't. And Mark, sitting alone in the Arizona desert with his expensive, precise machinery, was about to learn a very old, very simple truth. Sometimes, when you look into the dark looks back. Ma didn't go back the next night. The skies clouded over. That gave him time to rationalize. A piece of space junk. An uncatalogued satellite. A glitch in the guide camera. He had a list of normal explanations by the time the clouds cleared 3 nights later. But he didn't point his telescope at Orion. He opened the first image. He found the exact pixel where that bright point had been. Using his software, he calculated the celestial coordinates. Right ascension. Declination. A specific address in the sky. He programmed those coordinates into his mount. Now, a reasonable person would have stopped here. He'd already gotten his beautiful nebula photo. The anomaly was a nuisance, a ruined frame. He should have moved on to another target. But Mark was an IT manager. He dealt in systems, in errors, in logs. An unexplained event in a controlled system bothered him. It was a bug in the code of the night, and he needed to debug it. The mount moved to the new position. It was a patch of sky in Ursa Major, far from the nebula's glory. A relatively empty star field. He took a test exposure, just 30 seconds. The image appeared. And there it was. Not a streak. Not a moving point. It was just a star. A bright, sharp, unwavering point of white light. Sitting perfectly still in the center of his frame. He took a 5-minute exposure. The result was the same. A perfect, stationary dot. No motion, no trail. It didn't drift. It didn't pulse. It just sat there, burning a pure, cold white onto his sensor. He checked his star charts. All the popular astronomy software. He looked at the known stars in that exact location. There was nothing cataloged at that brightness. Not even a faint, distant red dwarf. This was a star that didn't exist. He ran a longer exposure. 10 minutes. The object didn't move a pixel, but something else happened. The background stars, over 10 minutes, showed tiny trails. Because the Earth rotates. Because his telescope, even with its tracking, has tiny imperfections. Everything moves. Everything shifts. Except that one point. It was anchored. It was fixed. As if it wasn't subject to the same laws, or as if it was correcting for them with perfect, impossible precision. That's when the silence of the desert changed for him. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was attentive. He was alone on a hill, pointing a telescope at a thing that shouldn't be there. and the thing was just waiting, being a star. He packed up early. He drove home with the data. For 2 days, he stared at the files on his computer. He processed them, subtracting noise, enhancing contrast. The object remained. A brilliant, unwavering pinprick. He needed a second opinion. Someone with better tools, with access to databases he didn't have. He found the contact page for the Department of Astronomy at the University of Arizona. He wrote a careful, measured email. He described the initial streak, the stationary point. He attached the raw data files, the unprocessed scientific data. He asked if they could verify the object's coordinates or identify it. He sent it late on a Friday night. He expected a response in a week, maybe. A polite dismissal from a busy professor. He got a reply on Saturday morning. It was from a graduate student named Anya Sharma. Her tone wasn't dismissive. It wasn't polite. It was electric. She confirmed his coordinates. She had pulled data from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, a massive map of the heavens. There was no recorded object at that position, at that brightness. She had also looked at his data files. The object's signal was, in her words, extremely strong and curiously monochromatic. But the last line of her email was the one that changed everything. "I've checked against known satellite and orbital debris databases," she wrote. "There is no object with that brightness scheduled to be in that position, ever. Can we set up a time to talk? This is new." New. Not a mistake. Not a glitch. New! Mark read that word in his quiet home office, the hum of his computer, the only sound. And the feeling he'd had in the desert, that attentive silence, followed him inside. It sat with him in the room. Because when you find something new in a place you thought was mapped and understood, you realize the map is wrong. And you are suddenly, terribly lost. The collaboration began with a hushed, excited energy. Late-night video calls, windows darkened. Anya Sharma, brilliant and relentless, treated Mark's backyard rig as a remote outpost of her own research. She wanted data. More data. And the object obliged. It was there every clear night for weeks. Not just in the same general area, but in the exact same pixel. Mark would point the telescope to the coordinates, take a test shot, and there it would be. A perfect, unblinking dot. Anya confirmed it. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't in any orbit they could model. It was fixed, a nail hammered into the fabric of the sky. That constancy is what started to get to him. Stars twinkle. Planets wander. Satellites streak and vanish. Nothing in the heavens is that still. It was an error in the simulation. A detail that didn't belong. Then Anya called him, her voice tight with a new kind of focus. She'd run a basic spectral analysis on his data. "Now, you need to understand something about light from space. Starlight is a messy rainbow, sliced and diced by the elements burning in the star. It has a fingerprint. Satellite reflections are broad, white light, the sun's glare bouncing off metal. Mark," she said, "the emission lines, they're not natural. They're too narrow, too perfect." She explained it in layman's terms. "Boy!" The object was screaming in one very specific shade of blue-green, a wavelength around 495 to 500 nanometers. Like a laser. Not a natural celestial object, not a satellite. It's emitting, she said, not reflecting. It's producing this light itself. And the signature. It's artificial. It has to be. Artificial. The word hung in the dark of his office. It meant something made, something with intent. The horror, at that point, began its slow pivot. It was no longer about finding a strange thing in the dark. It was the dawning realization that the strange thing in the dark might also be finding you. Mark stopped just taking program sequences. He began to do what astronomers almost never do with deep sky objects. He started live viewing. He'd point the scope. He'd set the camera to a high gain, real-time feed. And on his screen, in the sea of faint, noisy stars, one point would burn through, steady and bright. He'd sit there in his backyard, the desert cold seeping in, and just watch it. For an hour. Sometimes 2. It became a ritual, a terrible one. He'd make coffee he wouldn't drink. He'd watch the screen, and the pinpoint would watch him back, unmoving, unchanging. The unblinking eye. You have to understand how deeply wrong this feels to someone who knows the sky. The sky is a river. Everything flows. Everything changes. This was a rock in the river. A rock that shone with a manufactured light. The silence during these sessions wasn't empty anymore. It was full. It was the silence of something holding very, very still. Then, on the night of November 8th, it happened. He was in his usual position. A little after 1 a.m. The live feed was a grainy gray field, the object a stark white beacon at the center. It was just reaching for his cold coffee mug. The light winked out. Not a fade. Not a flicker. One moment it was there, solid as a period on a page. The next, the screen was just gray noise and faint stars. His hand froze over the mug. His first thought was a cloud. But the sky was crystal. A technical fault. The mount had slipped. He checked the tracking readout. Perfect. His eyes dotted back to the screen, to the empty space where it had been. 1 second. 2. The silence in the desert became absolute. The crickets had stopped. There was no wind. It was the silence of a held breath. 3 seconds. Then, as suddenly as it had vanished, the point of light returned. Exactly where it had been. Exactly as bright. Unchanged. As if the last 3 seconds had simply been edited out. Mark didn't move. He didn't breathe. He stared at the screen, his coffee forgotten, the cold now deep inside his bones. The object sat there, steady, as if nothing had happened. But something had. In that 3-second gap of non-existence, the last vestige of scientific curiosity in Mark Ellison died. It was replaced by a pure, animal certainty. It had done that on purpose. It had closed its eye just to see if he was still watching, and when it opened it again, it knew that he was. The collaboration with Anya continued. The emails grew more technical, more coded. But for Mark, the investigation was over. He wasn't studying an anomaly anymore. He was locked in a staring contest with something in the dark. And he had just seen it blink. Anya's emails changed first. They were no longer excited. They were no longer filled with technical jargon and theories. They became short and clear. The subject lines went from spectral analysis results to update to just your data. She stopped using Mark's name. One email read, "In full, there have been questions from above. Our access logs are being reviewed. Be careful what you say." Mark sat in his office with the blinds drawn against the Arizona sun. He felt a cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Questions from above. He was an IT manager. He knew what that meant. Administrative oversight. Funding audits. But the way she said it felt heavier. He wrote back, trying to sound calm. "What kind of questions? Can I help?" Her reply took 2 days. It was a single line. "They want to know who else has seen the data." That was the moment the collaboration turned into something else. It wasn't two curious people chasing a mystery anymore. It was a secret they were keeping. And someone had noticed they were keeping it. He tried to call her the next evening. He needed to hear a human voice, to parse the fear in hers. The phone didn't even ring. It went straight to a robotic, disconnected tone. He stared at his phone. He checked the number. It was right. He opened his browser. He went to the University of Arizona's astronomy department page. He searched for Anya Sharma, graduate researcher. Her profile was still there, but it was different. The biography section, which had been a paragraph about her work, was now just her name and a generic university email address. Her photo, a smiling woman in front of a telescope dome, was gone, replaced with a blank gray silhouette. It looked like a placeholder, like a tombstone. 3 days later, the final email arrived. It was sent at 3:17 a.m. The subject was blank. The body of the message was just 4 sentences. We've lost funding for the project. Delete these images from your primary drive. Do not discuss them. It's not a satellite. It's not looking at the stars. It's looking back at us. Mark read it 10 times. The words didn't change. It's looking back at us. All the quiet dread of the desert, the feeling of the attentive silence, the 3-second blink, it crystallized into those 5 words. It wasn't a rock in the river. It was an eye. And it had a direction. It was pointed. He tried to reply. His message bounced back immediately. Address not found. That's when the anger came. A hot, desperate spike cutting through the fear. This wasn't right. They couldn't just erase it. He had the data. He had the truth on his hard drive. He found the main number for the Stewart Observatory. He called. He asked for the department head, a Dr. Armitage. After being transferred twice, a bored-sounding administrative assistant put him through. Dr. Armitage speaking. The voice was older, dry, completely devoid of curiosity. Mark stumbled through an introduction. He mentioned Anya Sharma. He mentioned the special project on anomalous stationary objects. There was a long pause on the line. Mark could hear the faint sound of a pen tapping on a desk. Mr. Ellison, Armitage said, his voice carefully neutral. The university sponsors many independent research projects. Some are defunded. Some are deemed outside the department's primary research scope. Ms. Sharma's work fell into that category. But the object, Mark pressed, his voice tighter than he wanted. It's real. We have the data. The spectral signature is... The data from defunded projects is considered proprietary to the researcher. Armitage interrupted, not unkindly, but with a firmness that felt like a door being shut. If Ms. Sharma is no longer with the program, the data is her responsibility, not ours. I'm afraid I can't discuss it further. Is she okay? Mark asked, the question bursting out. Another pause. This one felt different, colder. I have no further information on former graduate students, Mr. Ellison. I suggest you direct your inquiries elsewhere. Good day. The line went dead. Mark sat there, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone. It was the most mundane sound in the world. It made the whole conversation feel like a dream. But it wasn't. He looked at his computer, at the folder labeled Project-M. Inside were hundreds of FITS files, gigabytes of data. The streak, the stationary point. Weeks of the unblinking eye. Delete these images from your primary drive. He understood now. This wasn't a suggestion. It was an instruction from someone who was scared. A final piece of advice from a voice that had been silenced. He moved the cursor. He highlighted the folder. His finger hovered over the delete key. He pressed it. The system asked for confirmation. Are you sure you want to permanently delete these files? He was sure. The folder vanished from his desktop. He emptied the recycle bin. The data was gone from his main machine. But Mark was an IT manager. He dealt in backups, in redundancy, in disaster recovery. He walked to his closet. On a high shelf, behind a box of old cables, was a small external hard drive. It was not connected to the internet. It hadn't been connected for months. He backed up his entire astronomy library onto it before this whole thing started. The raw data from the first night, from every night, was on that drive. He took it down. He held the cold plastic rectangle in his hand. It weighed nothing. It contained an eye, looking back from the dark. He put it in the bottom drawer of his desk. He locked the drawer with a small key. He put the key on his keyring, between his car key and the key to his front door. A mundane object on a mundane ring, hiding a terrible secret. The official investigation was over. It had been taken away, scrubbed clean, dismissed in a 45-second phone call. But the observation continued, because he still had the data. And because every clear night when he dared to look up at that patch of sky in Ursa Major, he knew it was still there. Unmoving, unchanging, looking back. The official investigation was over. The data was deleted, the emails were dead, the graduate student was gone. For the university and for the world, the anomaly had never existed. But for Mark Ellison, it was just beginning. You see, the horror wasn't in the looking anymore. It was in the having looked. It was in the afterglow, that persistent phantom burn on the retina of his mind. He couldn't unsee that perfect stationary point, and he couldn't forget what it meant. It's looking back at us. He tried to go back to his routine. He waited for a clear night. He went to set up his scope. His hands, which had always moved with calm certainty, shook as he lifted the telescope case. He looked up at the familiar sprawl of stars. Instead of wonder, he felt a cold, crawling dread. His eyes were drawn against his will to that patch of black in Ursa Major. He couldn't see anything. But he knew it was there. An unblinking eye, fixed on a point in the void. By sheer cosmic bad luck, that point included his hill, his telescope, his backyard. He couldn't do it. He packed the cases back into his truck, untouched. A month later, he sold the entire rig. The mount, the guide scope, the beautiful 8-inch Ritchie Credian. He sold it to an eager young engineer from Tucson for a fraction of its worth. The man was thrilled with the deal. Mark just wanted it out of his house. The sight of the black tube in the corner of his office felt like having a loaded gun in the room. A gun pointed at the sky. That should have been the end of it. No more data. No more nights in the desert. Just a quiet suburban life in Phoenix, filled with server logs and phone calls. But the observation had migrated. It started about 2 weeks after he sold the telescope. He was in bed in that fluid state between waking and sleeping. He felt a familiar, terrifying lock of sleep paralysis settle over him. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even open his eyes all the way. This had happened to him before, years ago. It was unpleasant, but he knew the drill. You wait it out. You try to wiggle a toe. This was different. In this paralysis, he was painfully aware. He could feel the weight of the blankets. He could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. He could see the dim shape of his bedroom door through his slitted eyelids. And he could see the light. A single pinpoint of blue-green light. It appeared on his ceiling, directly above his bed. It wasn't a reflection. There was nothing in the room to make it. It was just there. A perfect, unwavering dot. The exact shade from the spectral analysis. Then it began to move. It didn't drift. It scanned. In slow, methodical lines, left to right, top to bottom, painting an invisible grid across the ceiling. Then, across the walls. It passed over his dresser, his chair, the framed photo of his parents. It passed over him. As the light traced over the blanket covering his chest, he felt a sensation. Not heat, not cold, a nullity. A spot of profound nothingness. It was as if his body in that specific inch was simply not reporting back. A sensor going offline. The light completed its pass. It returned to the center of the ceiling. It hovered there, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. Then it winked out. The paralysis released him. He gasped, bolting upright in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He fumbled for the lamp, flooding the room with warm yellow light. Nothing. Just his ordinary room. He told himself it was a hypnagogic hallucination. A trick of a stressed brain. The mind manifesting his fear. It happened again the next week. And the week after that. The scenario was always the same. The paralysis, the pinpoint light on the ceiling, the slow grid-like scan, the nullity as it passed over him. The sense of being catalogued. The sleep paralysis became a nightly ritual, more reliable than his old astronomy sessions. He began to dread going to bed. He'd drink coffee too late, watch mindless TV until his eyes burned. He did anything to stave off the moment when the lights went out and his own brain turned against him. Or, as he was starting to believe, let something in. He lived with two truths now. One was the gnawing daily certainty of what he and Anya had seen, a manufactured eye in the deep dark. The second was more terrifying. Why did the institution so desperately want it forgotten? What did they know or suspect that made them scrub a graduate student from their website and threaten a 49-year-old IT manager into silence? The answer, he feared, was in the drawer of his desk. He never opened the backup drive. He never plugged it into a computer. But he knew it was there. A small, black rectangle in the bottom drawer, locked away. It sat there like a radioactive pellet. It gave off no heat, no sound. But its existence was a constant, low hum in the back of his mind, a vibration of anxiety he felt every time he sat down to work. It was the proof, the only proof. And it was also the bait. Sometimes, in his darker moments, he thought about destroying it, taking a hammer to it, burying it in the desert. But he couldn't. It was the last thread connecting him to the reality of what happened to Anya. If he destroyed it, the world would truly have won. It would have erased the eye completely. So he kept it. And the eye, in turn, kept him. He stopped looking at the night sky altogether. He'd walk from his car to his front door with his head down. The stars, his old friends, were now just a backdrop for something else. A canvas for a stationary watching point. The horror wasn't out there anymore. It was in here. In his sleepless nights, in the locked drawer, in the way a simple, silent darkness could now feel like a held breath waiting for a blue-green light to click on and begin its scan. Mark Ellison had tried to capture the heavens, and instead, a piece of the heavens had captured him. It logged his coordinates, it analyzed his light, and now, in the quietest hours, it was running its diagnostics. And he was just data. And he was just data. The tape has reached its end. I hope the stories tonight brought a pleasant chill to your spine as you drifted further into the dark. Thank you for braving the shadows here at the Sleep Paralysis tapes. If you are still awake, lying still in the quiet, remember to contact me with your own unsettling encounters so they can be added to our growing archive. As my voice fades away, let the silence of your room wrap around you completely. May your sleep be undisturbed, your doors remain locked, and your morning arrive safely. Until we open the tapes again, good night.